Good afternoon, everyone. We hope you enjoyed the lunch. Welcome to the second part of the Brazil Climate Summit. I am Raissa Coan, second year of MBA student here at Columbia. Now let's get back to our agenda. Our next panel, titled Brazil's Sustainable Agriculture Role in the Worldwide Food Security, will explore Brazil's role in global agriculture, cutting-edge sustainable practice, technological innovations, and business opportunities. Brazil is the fourth largest agri-exporter, feeding almost 2 billion people. This places a double-edged sword, opportunity and responsibility. How will Brazil be able to supply the rising demand without compromising natural resources? What are the new different practices that could be brought to a global scale? What are the expectations for Brazil hosting the COP30 next year? To address these questions, we have a diverse group of experts here with us today. Please welcome Corinne Ricard, Senior Vice President at the Mosaic Company, Maria Siqueira, co-founder and Director of Public Policy and Programs at Pacto Contra a Fome, Pact Against Hunger, Ricardo Assunção, Sustainability and ESG Leader and Chief of Sustainability Officer at UI Latin America, and Shalini Unikrishnan, Global Lead for Societal Impact in the Consumer and Social Impact Practice at BCG. And our discussion will be moderated by Michael Stott, Latin America Editor at Financial Times. Michael, the floor is yours. Thank
you. Invite my panel to come up and welcome to this session. This session, very appropriately, is all about food, given that you've just had your lunch. And we're going to tackle, as Raissa mentioned, some of the big challenges, some of the paradoxes. You're going to hear about Brazil's crucial role in producing food to feed a hungry world, and in how it can do that more sustainably and more efficiently, how it can help to fill the calorie gap around the world, but some of the challenges it faces in doing that in a way that doesn't contribute to emissions, but actually helps solve the emissions problem. I like to think sometimes of Brazilian agriculture as a bit of a tale of two stories, that you have on the one hand the images we all know about an Amazon burning and deforestation and cattle ranchers and all so on, and the other side, which is much less known, which is the highly technological, highly sophisticated agricultural sector centered in the south and southwest of Brazil, which is a world leader in many areas, including some of the sustainable ones we're going to talk about. So you're going to get a little bit of all of that in this panel. And as Raissa said, it's a diverse panel. We've got a great deal of expertise here in the room. So I hope you enjoy it. We're going to start by asking Shalini Unikrishnan from BCG in Boston, who leads the food and agriculture practice globally, to give us a few thoughts to sort of center the discussion. We're looking at the global situation here and how Brazil sort of fits in. So Shalini, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the organizers here to get this panel together on such an important topic. To get us started, I'm going to zoom out of Brazil for a second and look at the global perspective. Maybe a few facts that we all know, but to set the stage. The food system we have today is not going to work for us in the future. It has been broken for a long time, but the cracks are getting bigger and more noticeable, and it is really not fit for purpose. We produce more than enough food, but we waste a third of what we produce. The agricultural system today, if you count land use and so on, is between a quarter to a third of the global emissions. And as I said, despite producing enough food, there's 1 billion people that are hungry, or malnourished, et cetera. And we have a massive challenge already in access, equity, pricing, et cetera, which is only going to continue to keep increasing as climate change impacts come through. So we do not have a food system that is resilient. So in that context, it is a global imperative for us to transform the food system we're in, to make it fit for purpose, to feed a growing population and to create food security. In that context, no one has ever understated the importance of Brazil. It is one of the largest producers in the world. But there's also another reason why it's really important that we're having this conversation about Brazil. And that's the opportunity side that was laid out at the beginning. Brazilian farmers have been surprisingly progressive. So it shouldn't be surprising, but maybe if you look at the media narrative and the global narrative about Brazil and the burning Amazon, sometimes one forgets to see that there's also the story of the farmers who adopt no-till farming at about roughly the rate as American farmers do, actually more than what European farmers do, adopt cover cropping at a rate that is higher than American farmers do, and several other practices. And so what lies within Brazil is not only the opportunity for us to create a resilient system in one of the largest food-producing countries in the world, but also the opportunity to create a lighthouse for the world to get to scale. And the word scale is really critical in sustainable agriculture, because what we have today is a large number of pilots, tons and tons and tons of pilots. And the biggest challenge we have is finding our path to scale. Scale in innovation, scale in financing, scale in operationalizing many of the known solutions. And this is where Brazil could be a real lighthouse, because you've got this base of farmers, you've got a fantastic opportunity in being able to bring life back into the degraded pastures, et cetera, with the opportunity with COP, the opportunity with G20, the opportunity with Brazil's ABC plan, et cetera. So there's just enormous opportunity in this moment to look to Brazil not as a source of how do we solve the problem, but as a source of how do we create a beacon and a lighthouse for the world.
Thank you so much, Shalini. It's a fantastic introduction. I think some really eye-popping numbers. Maybe some of you knew them, but I mean, the fact that the world wastes a third of the food it produces is absolutely staggering. If we're talking about sustainability here, that's the very beginning of sustainability, isn't it? Before we even get to how it's produced, but just wasting so much. We're now going to move from that global plane down to a sort of more of a Brazil focus. And for that, I'm going to ask Ricardo Assumpção to give us some opening remarks. He's the Chief Sustainability Officer for EY for Latin America. So very well placed to do that. Ricardo, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Michael. This is my third time speaking here at Brazil Climate Summit. It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you, Marina, Luciana, and George for inviting me. So I totally agree with Shalini about this global perspective in a moment that the emissions are growing up. So the 1.5, it's here right now. And we have a lot of already observed impacts in the planet. One of them is in the agribusiness sector. So Brazil has the challenge to become the #1 food producer. At the same time, we need to create a resilient and sustainable system to produce food. And once Brazil plays this significant role worldwide in food security through our sustainable agriculture practices, there is a lot of global implications that I believe we need to mention here today. So from a Brazil perspective, I have 6 topics that I think and I believe we need to explore more in this panel. One, of course, is the food production. Brazil is a major producer of commodities, a lot of them. And coffee, for example, we produce about 1/3 of all the coffee in the world. So we are able to regulate the price. And with our vast arable land and favorable climate as well, we can produce throughout the year. This contributes to have high yields and, of course, the ability to provide food not only for our population, but to export. When we speak about exportation, we are a leader in export. And this is important because, again, we are able to regulate not only price, but supply of the food in the world. Actually, I believe we are, as Raissa mentioned, we're feeding about 2 billion people in the world. So that is not easy. The third is how to improve our sustainable practices, like no-till farming and crop, livestock, forest systems. So this is important to understand that we are not competing areas for food producing and forest. This is very important. And maybe the central point here is how we need to invest more in research and development. So how we can use our degraded pastures, for example, and turn them into productive areas. This is important. And to finish my opening speech, maybe we have to speak more about policy and regulation, Michael. We have a lot of challenges ahead, and we need to put together government, the private sector, and the civil society together to discuss not only the long term, but the short term as well. I'll pause here.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. We're now going to come to Corinne Ricard, here on my right, who's Senior Vice President at Mosaic, which is one of the big fertilizer groups. And Corinne is going to talk to us about, among other things, the global calorie gap. So over to you, Corinne.
Thank you, Michael, and it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I think that the defining challenge for agriculture in the world today is how we are going to be prepared to feed 9 billion people by 2050. You know, that requirement, today's calorie gap to that point in 2050, where all 9 billion people have got an adequate amount of food and nutrition, is about a 50% calorie gap from where we stand today. That's the equivalent of 2 countries of India in terms of land space if we don't find a way to improve our productivity and our efficiency on the lands that we have today. So it's an incredible challenge for agriculture. It's a combination, it will require a combination of technology, better crop nutrients, and less waste, which I think we'll talk about soon. But all of this needs to be done within the environment of doing it in a sustainable way, so that it doesn't continue to contribute to degradation of the climate. And we need to expect farmers to be able to adapt their own practices to the changing climate and environment. So you've got a real challenge for farmers. They've got a responsibility and an opportunity, as we heard today when we had the introduction to the panel. And I think it will be a really interesting discussion to hear all of the different solutions that can come together to help ensure that farmers have a way to be able to meet this challenge of feeding the world in a way that allows them to succeed in a changing environment without further changing the environment in a negative way.
Thank you, Corinne. And just to sort of tie what you were saying about the calorie gap, 50%, with what we heard earlier about the world producing more than enough, I guess you're talking about the gap between the food actually supplied as opposed to the food produced, are you? Just to sort of, I think some of our audience might be wondering how to reconcile the two.
Yeah, I think that just to reconcile that, you're talking about optimal nutrition for 9 billion people in the world. We do not have that today. So to reach that, you've got a significant increase in food production just for the current population, and then you've got additional population. And that assumes that we haven't found ways to improve efficiency or reduce waste. So there are lots of potential solutions that can contribute to closing that calorie gap. One of them, I believe, is better crop nutrition so that you have better soil health. And better farming practices and conservation practices, as well as others that I know we'll talk about on the panel.
Great. Thank you, Corinne. And then I'd like to come now to our last panelist, Maria Siqueira from Pacto contra Fome, the Pact Against Hunger, an NGO, which is very focused on this question of waste, which is, as we've heard already, is a really crucial question, because the other sort of complicated, embarrassing and awkward statistic is that although Brazil is feeding between 1.5 and 2 billion people around the world, it isn't actually feeding adequately all of its own people. So, Maria, over to you for a bit on that.
Thanks for the introduction, Michael. And I would also like to thank Raíssa, and on behalf of Marina Cansado, the whole organization team of Brazil Climate Summit. It's been a journey to prepare, to be here, and also to be with all of you. So it's always a challenge to speak after lunch, but today, as we are talking about food, it is good because it brings up our empathy. What would be our day if we hadn't had our breakfast or lunch? What would be of us? So this is our starting point. And I'll start up with a question. why are we still finding it acceptable to be in a country who has 8 million people going through hunger, and at the same time is one of the largest producers of commodities in the world? We always say we're feeding the world, and we are wasting about 8 times what would be needed to feed all the hungry people in the country. Well, at Pacto Contra a Fome, we've decided this is not acceptable. So Pacto Contra a Fome is a non-profit organization who was co-founded by 40 of the most prominent leaders and also very powerful people from different segments that aims a no-hungry country by 2030. And Michael was just asking me a little bit before our panel if it is possible. And we believe Brazil doesn't have a problem of productivity, such as the African continent. We have a problem of efficiency, and we have a problem of tackling our most critical issues, such as poverty and inequality. At Pacto Contra a Fome, we work to strengthen public policy, specifically for food systems and also to poverty eradication. And we also connect different sectors to boost initiatives that are tackling both the problems of food loss and waste and also food security. To briefly answer your question, both food loss and waste and hunger are consequences of the unsustainable food systems we live today. So food is not getting to the people, and it's also generating great negative environmental impact and also economical impact. So tackling it is a triple win: environmental, social, and economical. If we talk, there's some data about FAO. Only 25% of the Brazilian population today eats what would be needed for a healthy diet. And this is a number of 2022, so it's only a quarter of our country eating healthily. And if we talk about waste, we calculated that at Pacto Contra a Fome that if Brazil reaches US or Europe food chains efficiency, we could avoid 16 million tons of waste per year. So it's a lot of food that is going through the pelo ralo, as we say in Brazil, and we have a cost of $150 billion also running through our hands every year because of food loss and waste. And this is also a very hot topic when we talk about the environmental impact. There is a recent announcement of OECD alert that the potential to reduce global agriculture greenhouse gases emissions is about by 4%. So we have a great opportunity when we talk also about Brazil. So this would be my starting point, and I believe we can have a good conversation about Brazil's efficiency to get food to people.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Maria. So if I come back to you, Shalini, you were talking about Brazil being a lighthouse for the world, the need to get to scale. Can we go a little bit more into detail on that? I mean, what needs to happen for Brazil to become a lighthouse for the world on sustainable agriculture, and what are the things that could be got to scale?
Yeah. So let me start off by saying what it is that we're trying to get to scale. We need solutions along the entire value chain, but the part that I was referring to is the production, right? So today, the production part of agriculture has significant environmental impact. Now, if there is deforestation that happens to be able to secure that land to produce, there's that impact. There's the carbon impact of production. There is the impact where the inputs may be overutilized and the runoffs from that. There's, so on and so on and so on. All of that is, a quarter to a third of the world's emissions, so it's not small. One of the solutions that the world is looking to scale, and the global community is looking to scale, is some people call it regenerative agriculture. Some people hate that term and call it sustainable, and we can all argue about what it's called. But it's a set of practices that focus on soil health, as you mentioned. And instead of fighting the soil to, continue to be extractive from it, it's a way to focus on the health of the soil. And there are certain practices that are generally acknowledged to help that, depending on the crop, depending on the place, it varies. But that's what we want to scale. Today, this is incredibly subscale, right? Lots and lots of pilots. But we've done research, others have done research with farmers in the US, in Brazil, in Europe, in India, in Indonesia, et cetera. And repeatedly the data shows that farmers that move to regenerative agriculture do better. They are more profitable. So there's a myth that if you move to sustainable agriculture, if you move to sustainable practices, yields will drop and the world will starve and farmers will suffer. And this is one of the most important myths to bust, because that is what is preventing us from fundamentally investing in what are known solutions to tackle food security issues and tackle climate change. So this is what we need to get out there, is that the data shows again and again. Now there is a dip in yield for some time. 2, 3, 4 years. The average is about 3 years in Brazil. And during that time, what farmers need, they don't need long-term permanent premiums. They don't need permanent subsidies. What farmers need is transition finance. Transition finance that's aimed for those few years while they are taking on the risk of making that transition. They need to be supported. Now, what we have is a bunch of pilots. If somebody gives a loan out there and across the way somebody gives a grant there and we need a clear understanding in Brazil, and this is what we are starting to work on. I see Arthur in the first row, starting to work on with the Brazilian government as well. A clear understanding of what is the full financing stack that the farmer needs during that time. And that's a combination of debt, that may be equity, that may be insurance, that may be whatever that is. We need a full understanding of that, and then the financial solutions brought together by the private finance, by public finance together to help farmers make that transition.
Thank you. Ricardo, I mean, Shalini was just talking then about, a lot of crop-related stuff, regenerative agriculture, soil health, these things, but Brazil's also a huge livestock producer, right? So what can be done to improve the sustainability on the livestock side? And you mentioned policy and regulation. Maybe you could say a bit more about the role of policy and regulation in that too.
Good question, Michael. First, just to comment, Charlene, what you said, it's maybe one of the solutions that we need to focus. When we invest in sustainable practice, we bring more innovation to our agribusiness. It became more effective, cost-effective. So this is not only for big companies, this is for small producers as well. And that's why we need a transition finance for that. And this is in Brazil is so important. The agribusiness sector is responsible for 28% of our GDP. So, and our emissions came on the majority from land use and illegal deforestation. So, speaking a little bit more about livestock and areas in Brazil, I believe, Michael, it's important to understand how we divide our areas in Brazil. Probably most of our audience don't know that. So Brazil has about 851 million hectares. 4% of that are urban areas, cities, okay? 66% of that are native forest, our biomas, our preserved biomas, like the Amazon, like the Cerrado, the Mata Atlântica. Then we have 20% of degraded pastures. So this is the number. And do you know the number of the area that we produce food in Brazil? Just 7.5%. And this is a huge area. It's the same area of France, for example, just to have an idea of comparison. So what we need to do, Michael, is we have space for livestock, and we can invest in these degraded pastures to make them productive in the agribusiness sector. And just to have an idea of how effective we are in our agro practices, we grew about 600% in productivity in the last 20, 25 years. And we grow just 150% in area.
So just forgive me a question, Ricardo. I mean, an obvious question, but if it's a good idea to invest in degraded pastures to make them productive, there's so many of them, so much of them, why isn't it happening?
There is, how many time you have? Yeah, that's a very good question. First, we need a lot of investment. A lot of money. The capex is brutal for that to happen. Then you have a cultural problem in Brazil. We need to change the mindset. We have a lot of people that don't know that produce in the Amazon, for example, is not good for profits. Then we have the policy and regulation problem as well. Land ownerships and a lot of problems in this line. So, Michael, but I really believe that we have a spotlight in Brazil right now. We have a spotlight in Latam, but in Brazil as well. So we have a great opportunity to understand first that there is no competition between forest and agro or livestock areas in Brazil. We have space for everybody. And second, we have a lot of room to grow. So what we need, and there is a government program, a focus on turning these degraded pastures in productive areas. So, and the secret is to invest in research and development. So, and we can, when we speak about carbon, this is a great opportunity for carbon sink as well, when we have planted forest.
Yeah, maybe if I
please.
could just add,
Corinne, yeah.
on the degraded pastures, there's a number of barriers, but this has been really well studied in Brazil. Embrapa and other companies have invested a huge amount of effort to understand what's the most effective way to improve degraded pastures. And we know that it is a classic win-win-win where, you know, it is better for farmers, it is better for the environment, it is better for society if we can get those pastures improved. But it does take an investment up front. You know, you need to put crop nutrients on those pastures. You need, and that will be a couple of years before a rancher will see a return on that investment before they see cattle coming off of that pasture land. And so there is the financing issue on the upfront end. But those degraded pastures, when they're invested in, can sequester far more carbon. And they really are a win-win-win. It's the type of solution that we need to scale and we need to find ways to get there. But why it's not happening so far, Michael, is the front-end investment. I think there's a knowledge and technology gap where ranchers don't believe that you have to spend any money on a pasture in order to put it to use. So there's an education gap, and there's an investment in just equipment to be able to treat degraded pastures. And so it will take that financing work and that education work that it will require all of the public and private partnerships.
Thanks. That's really helpful to understand. And just coming to your other point about, you know, the calorie gap, we like to think always that we're sort of progressing as humanity, sort of gradually in fits and starts, moving forward, getting nearer to these goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, eliminating hunger. Are we actually making progress on eliminating hunger in the world, Corinne, at the moment? I mean, what does it look like? Is that calorie gap getting bigger or smaller?
Yeah, in the last couple of years, we had been making significant progress. But in the last couple of years, we've taken a step back in terms of that hunger gap because we saw a lot of volatility in markets and prices after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. And you saw huge spikes in fertilizer prices. And farmers that are subsistence farmers, where they are consuming whatever they grow on their property, did not have any kind of economic payback in selling grain in order to make that investment on their land for better crop nutrition. And so you saw a decrease in those yields, and you saw a real impact on hunger in much of Africa, much of Central America, and even portions of Brazil. And so it is really a challenge that we have in the world to be sure that we're making progress towards that calorie gap.
Thank you. And looking at it in Brazil, Maria, I mean, you were mentioning that we still have, I think it was 8 million hungry Brazilians. It seems extraordinary. We've had a president in Brazil, in Lula, who made this a top priority right from his first term in 2000. And here we are 23 years later, 24 years later, he still hasn't done it. I mean, if Lula can't do it when he makes it his top priority, Brazil, who's going to do it? I mean, what on earth is going wrong here?
That's a good point, Michael, because political priority, it is a step towards this goal of a zero hunger Brazil. And it was very important during the last couple decades, the first decade of the 2000s, because we've accomplished to bring up several public policy that were aimed at eradicating hunger. For example, the minimum wage increasing, the economical development, the conditions of employment, and also food production public policy. For example, I was going to add to Shaleen and to Ricardo, we have this program in Brazil which is called the Programa de Aquisição de Alimentos, which is the acquisition food program, which is led by the government, and the government gives incentives to small producers to produce the food basket produces so they can sell to schools, to public hospitals, and also to social institutions. So this is one of the programs that has shown a very good cost-effective index and also a very good ROI. So there is it has shown that it needs investment, and also as Shaleen was saying about investing in farmers, we have to think that when it comes to small farmers, this is a very different group from those who produce commodity, for example. So the challenges are basic, such as technical assistance. So we have to think differently when it comes to financing, and also what kind of support do they need to increase productivity, because in Brazil, soy production and cane sugar production has increased over the last couple of years, but for example, beans production, which is one of the most eaten items in Brazil, has decreased. So something is happening in the production of the basic products in Brazil.
I mean, we had a session earlier on in the day about sustainable aviation fuel, and obviously Brazil has a big biofuel program, but biofuels are controversial, aren't they, globally? And some people believe biofuel is a bad thing, that it takes away resources and land from what should be devoted to growing food. So I'd be interested in hearing the thoughts of some of our panelists on that. I don't know who'd like to volunteer an answer, but do we like biofuels, or do we think it should be all about food, Here's a tough one. Who'd like to take that one?
If I like biofuels? Yes, Michael, I like biofuels. For sure, biofuels is one of the solutions for decarbonization. And we need to invest. And we need to understand that biofuels will not, in most of cases, will not compete with food. That's clear. But it's, of course, a solution. We need to study more. We need to develop more studies about that. That's why we just launched in Latam what we call the Center of Excellence in Agribusiness at UI. So it's a global center with global knowledge of agribusiness to understand how to leverage the competitive advantage that we have locally. Because we are not so good in export innovation. We are not so good in selling ourselves to the world. So most of the time, that's why we believe that something that is good, the global do not recognize as something so good. Biofuels, it's one of these. I'll pause here.
Anyone disagree? Any disagreement? No? We're all agreed on that. Okay. Unanimous vote of confidence in biofuels.
I don't think that I don't think anyone here is going to not recognize that there are trade-offs. And biofuels it's not biofuels versus food. There's also a feed question. A lot of what is produced is actually feed for in many places. So it's not to say that there's not a debate and that it's not ongoing and that it's not reasonable. I think what the perspective, at least my perspective, and maybe others will agree, is that we don't need to say it is one or the other to start to solve the fundamental challenges we have in agriculture, and that is in how we're producing what we're doing with what we're producing, you know, the loss and the waste that is occurring, how we're distributing that, you know, how we're distributing the calories and the nutrition around to people. There's just a lot for us to tackle without getting into a black or white debate about one or the other.
Yeah, it's sometimes used, isn't it, as a reason for restricting biofuels. I mean, in the EU, it's discussed quite often. So yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that because in Brazil, there is a very good example about thinking about these two challenges differently but integrated. So we have, last year it was launched the Plano Safra, which is a financement program also from the government, but there was two of them. The first one was focused on big producers and commodity producers, such as cane sugar and so on. And the other one was thinking about the small farmers. Those are different challenges, and we have to think it differently, but we can also think it connectedly, because, for example, the efficiency of the commodities chain is much better than those from the food basket produces, such as beans and rices. So we have a lot to learn, so thinking it connectedly could be a way.
Can I build on what you said? I think one of the challenges in the conversation for a long time has been when we look at agriculture for its individual outputs. How do I solve that corn problem? How do I solve the soy problem? How do I solve this? There's a reason. So you know, I'm a co-chair of this COP28 initiative. That was the flagship effort launched last year across the UN, WBCSD, BCG, et cetera, on regenerative agriculture, but specifically on a landscape approach. And that is really important. Because instead of talking about what do we do with this corn, what do we do with that biofuel, what do we do with this, the question is, how do we take a landscape, and a landscape is the natural asset, it has farmland, it could have forest land, it's the water resources in that, it's the watershed that supplies it, et cetera. How do you look at a landscape and say, what is our holistic plan for transformation of that landscape and the communities and the people that rely on that landscape? And if we do not take a landscape approach, we will find ourselves debating over, well, is my corn idea better than your soy idea? Is my technology better than your technology? And we have this proliferation of pilots everywhere. So if we look at this action agenda, the requirement was that any company or organization that was joining had to give us their confidential supply chain data. We hold it in a clean room, but they have to tell us where they're running projects, where do they plan to run projects, how many hectares of land, what crop, what, you know, who are they working with, all of that. So we have about, at the moment in the past few months, what we've gathered up is about 325 million hectares worth of projects that these 35, 40 organizations, some of the top companies in the world, but also you know, other organizations like Nature Conservancy are involved in. 40% of the land that's been identified for projects for sustainable agriculture is in Brazil. But if you look at the average size of these projects, they are tiny. There's a few big ones, but they're mostly tiny. And what we're discovering is that companies and organizations are doing projects. One farmer is in one project, and across the street, the other farmer is in another project. And there's a corn project, and there's a biofuel project, and there's a something else project. So I want to reinforce your point of integrated thinking, and that's where the landscape approach can be a really powerful way for us to think holistically about how to drive transformation.
Thank you. Corinne, just coming back to your point about fertilizers and the Ukraine war and the effect that had on global fertilizer supplies, it seems quite surprising, doesn't it, that the world fertilizer supply is so concentrated in relatively few countries. I mean, how do we get around this problem? Because unfortunately, there will be more wars and conflicts. I think it's a safe bet. How do we diversify the supply of fertilizer so we don't get these spikes that cause huge problems for farmers around the world?
Yeah, fertilizers are challenging in that they're resource-based. And so, you know, you will only get potash and potassium where there is a natural reserve of it. You cannot make it, you cannot invent it out of the air, and even recycling it from crop waste is very difficult to get in economic scale. And so we will always have the challenge of concentrated reserves in specific countries. And they are particularly challenged. Russia has very large reserves. Morocco has very large reserves. China has very large reserves and has started to ensure that their reserves stay in their country in order to ensure affordable pricing for Chinese farmers. And so you're seeing a lot of trade barriers and tariff barriers created, in addition to supply disruptions caused by wars, by shipping disruptions in the Middle East, et cetera. The Brazil government has actually made a concerted effort to try and address the dependency that Brazil has on imported fertilizers. Today, I believe imported fertilizers are nearly 80% of what is used and needed in Brazil. It's an astronomical number, and it's a huge vulnerability. And the government is working hard on with a national fertilizer plan to try and address ways to improve local production. But again, that local production needs to come from the natural reserves in the country, the resources there, or in the case of nitrogen, from natural gas pricing, which today is not really globally competitive price-wise. But the government is working on policies and approaches to be able to help develop that.
So Brazil does have some potential for producing its own fertilizer.
There are reserves. So Mosaic has 6 mines in Brazil and 5 chemical plants producing fertilizer, but this is really a drop in the bucket compared to the demand in the country. And the ability to expand on those is somewhat limited. Nitrogen is potentially an opportunity if the natural gas pricing can be effective and competitive.
Thank you. Just coming back into sort of regulation and policy, Ricardo, the EU introducing this deforestation law, which is Brazil has complained about, wrote a letter in the last few days complaining about, saying it was disguised protectionism. I mean, what's your view on how you balance laws to try to limit deforestation like that one, and agricultural protectionism, which is a bad thing in itself?
Michael, we need to have clear rules about deforestation, and it's not allowed to have products that are produced from illegal areas or illegal deforestation areas. So for me, we need to have a zoom out of all of that and understand how we can create a more responsible world for everybody. Okay, and it depends. You have to change your mindset, and you have to understand. So, how I can invest to be more sustainable and profitable at the same time? That's the only way we have. So, for me, it's more about a regulation, set a level, a baseline, and so that's important. And I agree with that. But we need to understand what comes next. Companies like ours, professional companies, we need to think what the market needs today, but how to create long-term plans, how to integrate sustainability in the strategy, in the core of business. So regulations is risk management. It's one part of all of that. We need to understand how to create long-term value with sustainability. And if I have just 30 seconds more, what are the market is looking for? Things that we are not speaking in our meetings or in our panels. So they are looking for circularity with the business itself. So how to do it? Economic feasibility studies, resource mobilization for project finance as well. They are looking for diversified business models, not just a single isolated one. They are looking for companies that have natural resource but need cash. So small companies that need cash. How we can do that? How we can scale up solutions for finance these small companies that need cash, and sometimes they have really effective solutions. So we have to look more broad to the market, Michael, and understand not only what we are speaking in the panels, we are speaking in our meetings, but what can we do to complement this environment of the agro business, the sustainable agro business.
Thank you. We're coming towards the end of the session, but I did want to ask you, Maria, just in terms of sort of practical measures, you were talking about how improving the efficiency in the food distribution chain and storage chain is critical, and how we can help there, how it's a triple win. What's one thing that Brazil could do that would make the biggest impact in this area? If you had to just prescribe one thing, what would it be?
I'll connect with the topic of regulation and public policy, because nowadays in Brazil, we don't hold any mechanisms that are incentivizing the businesses to reduce their food loss and waste, or redistribute the food that would be lost to social institutions and so forth. So we really believe the public policy and regulations are key in a country that nowadays has nothing with it. So. But the thing is, when it comes to what drives business, these regulations and public policy, they have to be connected with the business mindset. So if not, we're going to build legislations that are not feasible, because when we talk about efficiency, those are not easy changes. Those are very structural changes. So to bring together multi-sectoral discussions, to bring up this public policy together, we really believe it's a key target for us to pursue the next couple of years.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Well, let's hope we see some progress in that area. And I hope also that this discussion has given you all in the room a little bit of a sense of some of the opportunities that are out there. Enormous opportunities for Brazil to contribute to feeding the world, but doing so in a more sustainable, more efficient way, as well as at the same time filling the gap there with its own citizens, and doing it in an efficient way. So thank you all very much. You've been a fantastic panel. I hope you in the audience have enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Marina Ferraz. I'm a master's student in sustainability management at Columbia University. First of all, for those at the Amazon breakout room, the session is about to start. And now, I want to invite Davi Canassa, CEO of Votorantim Reservas, for an announcement. Together with Davi, I call to the stage Carlos Martins from ACX, Yuri Marinho from Econ, and Janaína Vilela from B3.
Hi. Hello, everybody. You listen to me? Okay, thank you. It's a very big pleasure to stay here with these incredible people. We are together to announce a very how I say, unprecedented initiative that we developed along all this year. Last year, here in New York, me and Yuri Marinho of Econ stayed together to announce we apply in Legado das Águas, a reserve that we have in Atlantic Forest in Brazil, the first application of a new methodology. A methodology thinking to solve many of the problems that you have to have when you're thinking about nature-based solutions. After this, we are discussing with many people what the next. And we find in B3 the exchange in Brazil, the possibility to give the next step. But first of all, I invite Yuri to explain in little words the methodology.
Thank you, Davi. Thank you, everybody. As Avi said, we were here last year to launch a methodology named PSA Carbon Floor, which is a tropicalized methodology that uses conservation to measure environmental services and convert these services into credits. And these credits may be tradable in the international market. So we discussed this methodology, the scientific aspects of this methodology in Brazil and also here in New York, in Madrid, in Dubai, and other countries in the International Conference of the Parties. And now we are announcing here together the application of this methodology and the use of this methodology in the national market with B3 and ACX. In our scope, the scope here is to enable new methodologies, new ideas to enhance this market in Brazil and to measure environmental services and convert that into business.
So hello, everyone. Just to add the information, it's a pleasure to be here, to be part of this initiative, providing the registry environment of those projects. The idea, for those who didn't know, B3 is a stock exchange of Brazil. So the idea is the platform receive those project information. It will be a repository of data. This initiative is in line with our strategy of creating new ESG products and developing sustainable economy agenda. So I'm going to pass the word to...
And it's necessary to, first, we have a very good place to register. And in the second place, to sell the credits.
Thanks, Davi. I've been losing money with carbon trading for the past 25 years. So I'm in a very good position to say that this initiative is a landmark initiative worldwide. ACX is a global platform to trade carbon credits and environmental assets. We have a global order book, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, Brazil, and other locations. And the idea is to use the infrastructure of regulated entities such as B3 and open our order book to local and foreign investors. I'm very bullish. First time that Brazil stands up and creates its own nature-based standard. I've always resented the fact that we have to deal with NGOs located outside of Brazil. They have their merits, but I believe we're going to be able to leverage our capabilities and deliver what the world expects from Brazil.
Well, guys, we work hardly in the last months to construct all this structure. Janaína of B3, Econ with Yuri, Carlos Martins with ACX, and Reservas Votorantim implementing the project in this beautiful place that you see there in Atlantic Forest in the Legado das Águas. But in the last weeks, one project like this only is complete if someone buys the credits. Then I would like to invite my friend of CCR, that is the first buyer inside of B3's platform about this project. Please.
Hello, everybody. Do you hear me? Yeah? So, well, it's a pleasure, an honor to be here. I will be speaking in a panel in a few moments. But for those of you who don't know CCR, we are the largest infrastructure mobility company in Brazil. So we've been part of the problem, let's put it this way, land use and all the investments that we had to deploy throughout this past 30 years. But we are definitely on the way of being part of the solution. And this here, we understand, is a very credible solution, one of the many avenues that we need to explore in order to implement a transition, economy of transition, especially in companies like ours. A very capital-intensive infrastructure, mobility infrastructure is, it's a necessity and we lag in Brazil. So we were very proud to partner with very credible institutions. We understand the methodology, we trust the methodology. It's a methodology from our neck of the woods. We like that. We like the transparency. We like all the process that has been, and the work has been put together to do this. And we wanted to be the first one to have a registered transaction, a B3, and buy these credits. And I think I'll make more money on and not lose. It's not a lose-lose situation. So I think this is a
pay my fees.
I think this is a great investment for CCR as part of our strategy. And so I congratulate you guys for putting it together, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Okay.
Well, finally, in the next months, we are inviting, if other companies would like to join us to understand better what we are doing, the first primary registry in Brazil of a project, a Brazilian project with a Brazilian methodology. It's very interesting that we thinking about in all possibilities that this initiative can bring for us. We are talking this. And in this week, in these next 2 weeks here in New York, all the possibilities that you have with Brazil. Now we have one very good solution in place that is working. We are talking about this here today. We need solutions that work. And now we have one solution about carbon credits in nature-based solutions, okay? And we combine to sign here with my buyer, the first transactions that we are developing the next months, okay? Then I invite Pedro Sutter to sign with me this document. Thank you, guys. It's a pleasure to stay here.